Welcome back to Proxamer, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the new reveals that GW went ahead and released about characters. So apparently, characters will be joining units again in 10th edition. So this is something that GW has done in the past with their rules. Characters used to be able to join units, and those units would become stronger as a result, typically. Although in the past, characters haven't always been that useful to units. And I remember in past editions, 5th edition, and even 4th edition, units were often just used to protect characters, and the characters wouldn't necessarily do anything for that unit, other than provide combat support. However, I think it's going to be quite a bit different with this edition, and I'm actually looking forward to seeing what kind of things GW has planned for characters in 10th edition. I was a little bit apprehensive at first, I have to admit. When I heard that characters were going to be joining units again, I immediately disliked it because I remember the days when character spam in units was a thing. You'd have multiple characters in one single unit, and it was just an absolute mess. And it was really overpowered. So you would have these huge Death Stars with, 2 or 3 characters in them. You had your apothecary in the unit, you had your chaplain in the unit, you had your chapter master in the unit, and it just got crazy to the point where it was like, you basically just couldn't touch that unit. It was just so impossible to kill. So I'm glad that they're actually not doing that this time around. They have some limits in place that I'll talk about in the video. And honestly, I think how they're doing it is actually quite balanced. So without further ado, let us dive right in to the reveal and the video. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at what GW revealed for how characters will work in 10th edition. And furthermore, we're going to be talking about what this will mean for the Craftworld Eldar and how Eldar characters might function in units. So starting with the first reveal, we have the Primaris Lieutenant. Now, typically I wouldn't be talking about Space Marines, but we're going to kind of use this as a context to talk about Eldar characters. So every single leader or HQ choice or character is going to get either 1 or 2 abilities that designate what kind of character they are. So leaders must join units, and they will also buff that said unit. So here, the Primaris Lieutenant has 2 abilities that he gives his unit. He has Tactical Precision and Target Priority. So both of these buff the unit. One of them gives lethal hits, which is basically 6s to hit auto wound, which, to be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of auto wounding abilities, but if it's something that's being limited to just characters being able to give it to units, I think that's balanced. I think that's a good way to balance it instead of giving it to a whole army. So there's kind of a pro and a con to that. Obviously, I think that auto wounding abilities are kind of a cheap way of interacting in the game. But also, if a character is leading the unit, I can understand having that unit being a little more powerful, a little more hard hitting. It also gives a utility ability to the unit, which is basically the unit's eligible to shoot and declare charge in a turn in which it fell back, which is really cool. And that also says something else about 10th edition, and basically from what I gather, falling back and the mechanics behind falling back are going to be relatively the same. So that's also good to know because I think actually that system worked out very well. Okay, and basically GW follows this up with talking about the Tactical Precision and Lethal Hits ability that the Primaris Lieutenant confers to the unit. And usually only one character can join a unit. So they make this very apparent. They want people to know that character stacking is not really going to be a thing. However, lieutenants have an exception. So lesser characters that function kind of like buffers, like Warlocks, I'm sure apothecaries are the same way, will be able to attach to a unit once, in addition to a bigger commander. Now, I think this is because, obviously, with the amount of characters that are in the game, it would have been very difficult for you to find units to place every single character if GW had not had some kind of system like this. So basically, each unit can take a primary character, which is a main character, main HQ, like a Farseer, an Autarch, or something like that, and can also take secondary characters, which for our codex would be something like a Warlock, which actually they mention in this article. Lookout Sir is also changed. So basically characters cannot be dealt wounds. So basically you can't allocate wounds to characters until all of their unit is dead. I actually like this a lot. This means that units can't spread wounds around. This is great. In the past, players would have a very tough character in a squishier unit and they would just allocate all the wounds to the character. The character would survive and you basically couldn't kill the unit that easily. So I'm actually glad they're changing this. Now, we don't know exactly how sniper weapons are going to work, but if sniper weapon shots can all be allocated towards characters, I think snipers will still be great. If they can't, I think they're going to suck. So I think basically if only 6s to hit can be allocated to characters and units, I think honestly it's just going to be bad. I don't think sniper weapons are going to be that great. We've had that before. It's not been that powerful. So units like Rangers, for example, might not be that effective at shooting characters, and they might be better off just targeting squads. As for characters like Illic Nightspear, I think they'll still be great because if they have the potential to one-shot characters, they're still going to be useful, right? They're just not going to be as useful as they are now. Leader units can also only join specific units. So it's listed on their datasheet. And this is where I see some room for issues because some Eldar units are a certain type, right? So we have jet bike units, we have jetpack units, right? Like warp spiders and swooping hawks. And Farseers only come in foot versions and Skyrunner or jet bike versions. So what that could potentially mean is a Farseer cannot join a unit of warp spiders. Why would you want this? You probably wouldn't want this anyway, to be honest with you, just because they would slow down the warp spider unit, but it just restricts things a little bit. As far as the jet bike goes, because certain models will have different movement values, this is also going to affect it. So jet bike units will probably only be able to be joined by jet bike characters, and jump pack units will probably only be able to be joined by jump pack characters with the corresponding war gear. So that could be a little bit tricky. We're going to talk about that when we talk about autarchs. But basically, yeah, this is it. Now, there are some redacted parts of this, and my guess is that the redacted parts that GW released are either new reveals with new units or units with jump packs or bikes, if your lieutenant is actually equipped with one. And here they go on to say that the Primaris lieutenant has the leader ability, and he is only able to join certain units. So basically they say that this leaves Gravis armored aggressors and heavy intercessors to his more appropriately equipped colleagues. So that means that a Primaris lieutenant could not join a unit with Gravis armor, which makes sense, right? So in this vein, I think that we can also assume that jet bike Farseer Skyrunners, and autarch Skyrunners could not join regular infantry units, and vice versa, right? Foot characters could not join jet bike units as well. They also mentioned that there is a lone operative ability that some characters will have, and basically these lone operatives never join units, but they can never be the target of a ranged attack unless the attacker is within 12 inches. So this is kind of like, well, it's kind of like some of the Harlequin psychic powers that basically prevent units from being targeted, which I think is really cool. I think this is a really good way to balance lone operatives. So for our codex, things like the Solitaire would be a lone operative, right? A unit that would never join another unit to buff them, still gets the benefit of not being able to be shot at. So I think this is very cool. However, if you can get within 12, lone operatives can be shot at. So it's a little bit different than it is now. In some ways, they're more defensive, but in other ways, they might not be. So you do have to be careful about that. Using your lone operatives in a way that puts them in danger might actually really hurt you in the beginning of the game. Unlike it is now where lone operatives and lone operative type units like Solitaires still get the benefit of Lookout Sir. They also talk a little bit about a new announcement they're going to make later this week about how vehicles work in this edition. I'm very interested to hear about this, and I will be putting a video out on this when it comes out and how it pertains to the Craftworld Eldar. They specifically mentioned skimmers, which is kind of cool. I think, our faction is the skimmer faction, quote unquote. So maybe that means that skimmers will get additional special rules again. So as of now, they really don't have that many special rules, except for a couple of extra keywords like the fly keyword. So I think it'd be pretty cool if they got some additional rules as well in regards to maybe their ability to be hit. And this brings us to what it will mean for the Craftworld Eldar and how Eldar characters might function in units when placed in them. So we're going to be looking at Autarchs, Farseers, Warlocks, Spirit Seers, Phoenix Lords, and also Harlequin HQs. As for the Autarchs, I think they're probably going to be a bit awkward. And the reason why is because of the fact that they get different keywords when given different equipment. So Swooping Hawk Wings and the Autarch Jump Generator changes their keywords to Jump Pack Infantry. I think this will also carry over to the new edition. Maybe not in the form of keywords, but definitely in the form of different movement abilities, which might restrict them from being able to join certain units. So an Autarch with a Warp Jump Generator might only be able to join units with a Warp Jump Generator like Warp Spiders. Swooping Hawk Wings, well, you might only be able to join a Swooping Hawk unit. If it's on a jet bike, you're only going to be able to join other jet bike units, etc., etc. So that could make things a little bit more awkward and make it more important for any player designing their list to make sure the Autarch has a place to go. Also, another point is that you can only move as fast as your slowest moving unit. So even if Autarchs are allowed to join units with their Swooping Hawk Wings and with their Autarch Jump Generator, they're not going to be able to use the abilities of that item, which again is also pretty problematic. Autarchs could also be lone operatives with auras, and in my opinion, that's the best fix for Autarchs. I think that would be a great thing to happen to them, but I don't think it's likely, and I think they will most likely just give buffs to a single unit, and they might also have some special rules for their whole army. But it's most likely going to be the fact that they're going to be still placed in units. And some of the possible buffs they could give to units, I'm thinking they could give a different deployment like they did in the past. There was times in the past where attaching an Autarch to a unit of Striking Scorpions or Swooping Hawks would also give the corresponding deployment ability to the Autarch. So I think that would be cool if the Autarch gave different deployment abilities to the units he or she joined. As for Farseers, I think Skyrunners obviously will most likely have to join other jet bike units, so we're going to have to think harder about which units to include in our army, and also which type of Farseer we want on our lists. Having at least one jet bike unit in our army to accompany a Farseer or an Autarch on jet bike might be a compulsory choice for most Eldar builds. As far as their psychic powers, buff psychic powers might, and I say this with a large amount of salt involved, might only affect the unit they are joined with. And I hope not. I hope we can still buff kind of whatever units we want. Or at the very least, have the ability to choose what we do with our psychic powers. So if we want to buff our own unit, we can, but also be able to buff units within, something like 24 or 18 inches of range. However, you also might have a special synergy when attached to Warlock units, which I think is kind of a cool idea. So currently, we have a stratagem that allows us to basically get +1 to our psychic powers when near a Seer Council, quote unquote, which is a Warlock enclave. And I think Farseers might have some sort of synergy with Warlocks to where they cast better when they're with a Seer Council, so a Warlock unit. And I think that would honestly be a pretty cool thing for Farseers to finally be able to join their Seer Councils again, like in the days of old. I think that'd be really cool. Now, as for Malediction type psychic powers, again, I don't know exactly how they're going to work, but I suspect that they're going to work kind of the same as they do now. And buff psychic powers might be something where you choose a buff in the beginning of the game, and that buff only applies to your unit. And this is one of the points, again, like I said, I'm a little bit worried about because it could affect the use of Farseers in a lot of lists. Now, Warlocks I actually think are one of the most interesting characters because now, as per the GW announcement, Warlocks will also be able to join units in addition to other characters like Farseers, Spiritseers, and Autarchs. So they're an additional unit. They're kind of like a Primaris Lieutenant in that way. And the Runes of Battle buffs might become passive effects chosen in list building. Now, I'm not actually opposed to this, to be honest. I don't think it'll be quite as detrimental as Farseer buffs like Fortune and Guide will be, because obviously Farseers joining things like Warwalkers or, units that basically the Farseer doesn't want to be a part of, and not being able to guide them, like things like Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders, not being able to guide that would be really detrimental to the Eldar playstyle, in my opinion. And something that's never really existed. Now, I might be wrong on that, and Psychic Powers might just work as they do now. But the Runes of Battle buffs maybe becoming passive are not that bad, and the debuffable powers, or the debuffs, being castable Psychic Powers, I think would be really cool. So imagine a Warlock having a Psychic Power debuff that they could cast once per turn, and at the same time, the passive buff that they get from that power is just always in effect for that unit. So basically, back in the day, in 5th edition and 4th edition, if you included a Warlock in a unit, you could give it a passive Psychic Power, and it just got that power. So Enhance, the unit just got Enhance. Conceal, the unit just got Conceal. So I think if this returns, I think it would be a huge buff to Warlocks and a huge buff to the units they're with, including, by the way, in my opinion, Wraith units, which I think are going to be looking pretty strong in this edition. And now that they can join any squad and provide buffs, there might be some good Guardian synergies as well. So being able to cast Conceal and be within a Guardian unit and provide them some buffs would be really awesome. It would be really thematic. And again, it would bring us back to a time when Guardians were actually not that bad. And I'm actually really excited to see the return of that. So moving on to Spiritseers. Spiritseers are something I actually think is going to be one of the gems of 10th edition, especially in the Eldar Index. The reason why is because I think Wraith units being tougher, and because of the fact that we know that tougher units are getting tougher, I think that Spiritseers are going to have a really big place in Eldar lists. And even though they'll probably only be able to attach to Wraith units, they will most likely have the same powers as Warlocks, but in addition, be able to buff Wraith units significantly. So Wraith units that they're a part of are going to be buffed significantly. Warlocks can also join Wraith units and buff them even further. So you can actually have stacking buffs on Wraith units, which is going to be extremely powerful, I think. Just imagine a Wraith unit with something like Protect, if it still exists, and Conceal, if it still exists, on top of whatever the Spiritseer is going to debuff the enemy with and whatever passive buffs they are going to give the Wraith units. Wow, that could potentially be a really strong combination. So I actually think that Spiritseers are going to be making a comeback, and especially when we see more about the stats and special rules and everything of Wraith units, we'll be able to get a better picture of where Spiritseers are going to stand competitively. But I have to say, I think they're back, guys. I think Spiritseers and Wraith units especially are going to be very strong in this edition, just looking at the early indicators. Phoenix Lords are probably going to be lone operatives. Now, I say that because Phoenix Lords would be extremely awkward to fit into any unit because of the fact that, A, they're an aspect warrior and they can only really mix with their own aspects. So Baharoth, if he still is in the index, is only going to be able to be with Swooping Hawk. So I think they're probably going to be lone operatives. Otherwise, they'd only be able to attach to their own aspects. And I think they're going to have an aura buff of some kind and probably an additional buff to their own aspect. So, maybe all units within 6 inches of them get, +1 attack or +1 leadership or whatever that is. And then specifically striking scorpions, if it's Kahandras, or swooping hawks, if it's Baharoth, will get some sort of damage buff additionally. And although we don't know their abilities yet, I'm pretty sure they're going to be pretty strong. And at least the ones that are still in the index are going to be pretty good. So here's the fear that I do have about Phoenix Lords, though, is that most of the ones that don't have models that are new that have been recently pulled off of the GW store are going to be pulled out of the index as well. So I'm hoping this isn't the case, because we'll be basically not able to use Phoenix Lords until they can release a plastic kit for them, which honestly could be months after the rulebook releases. We just don't know yet. It could be all the way in the next year in 2024, which would suck. But, you know, I am hoping they're going to be there, but we'll just have to kind of wait and see. As for Harlequin HQs, we have the Troop Master, and I'm sure he'll be a damage buffer. He'll give the unit some damage as well as some utility. Basically, I'm thinking he'll be some sort of Death Star killer, and he'll make his unit extremely good at cracking hard targets. The Solitaire will be a massive damage-dealing lone operative like he is now. The Shadow Seer will only affect the unit she is attached to and will probably be there to reduce damage and enemy range or line of sight. Kind of what she does now, except the passive buffs will be applied always instead of just temporarily with the psychic power. And the Death Jester will probably just deal damage and act as kind of like a Warlock unit when attaching to troops. So maybe you can have a Death Jester in addition to a Shadow Seer in a troop. And maybe a leadership debuff on units that they destroy, or models they destroy in units. So that's looking pretty good. I'm hoping Harlequins can get some sort of ability to allow them to be included in Craftworld detachments, but we'll just kind of have to wait and see how that shakes out. So in conclusion, nothing is certain yet, but both Warlocks and Spirit Seers are looking pretty good at being able to stack buffs on Wraith units. I think this is going to be an extremely powerful combination coming out of the gates of 10th edition. Both Autarchs and Farseers might be harder to place in units just because they can take multiple, different war gear options like jet bikes, Autarch jump generators, and swooping hawk wings, but will most likely still play a pivotal role. And obviously, I think at least one Farseer is going to be an auto-include in every single Eldar list, just like it is now. I think they are going to be needed, just like they always have. Now, when seeing these rules about characters, I was concerned at first, but I'm already pretty excited about it because it actually seems balanced. And I know it may not seem balanced to some of you who might think that some super characters might really make some units very powerful. But between the lone operative special rule and the leader special rule, I don't think we have anything to worry about opponents being able to stack too many buffs together. Now, there might be some situations where units can get multiple Primaris Lieutenants and stuff like that, and you just have a bunch of different mini Death Stars on the battlefield. And I do kind of think that that could be the case. But I still don't think it'll be that big of a deal overall, because many mini Death Stars is much easier to manage and deal with than one Mega Death Star that's impossible to kill. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. I know it was kind of a short one, but I just wanted to give you guys my take on characters and how they interacted with the Eldar and, our HQ and character choices. And as we get more information from GW, I plan to continue to release short videos like this, updating you guys on what I think it means for the Craftworld Eldar going forward. Thank you so much, by the way, to all of my Patrons and supporters who have supported the channel. Thank you so much once again. I will go ahead and leave my Patreon and PayPal links in the description for those of you who do want to support the channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all next time. I have a couple more videos planned this week, and I do have my game on Friday against my Imperial Guard opponent for my Escalation League, so I'll be sure to update you guys on that as well. All right, everybody, peace out. See you guys later. And have a good one.